I grew up in a household where silence often spoke louder than words. My parents weren't the type to raise their voices or throw dramatic tantrums. They believed in discipline, in quiet rules, in the kind of unspoken boundaries that you only noticed when you crossed them. And for as long as I could remember, there was one silent rule in our family. My sister's best friend, Emily, was not welcome. It was strange because Emily was, by all accounts, the type of girl every parent should adore. She was the kind of person who drew light when she entered a room. Tall, blonde hair that seemed to shimmer even in the dullest lighting. Sharp green eyes that always looked like they were hiding secrets. She was effortlessly popular at school, one of those girls teachers loved because she was charming, but classmates admired because she seemed untouchable. To me, as the younger sister, Emily was fascinating. She had this confidence that I couldn't even fake. My sister Caroline adored her, idolized her even. They were inseparable from the time they were 12 years old. When Emily wasn't at our house, Caroline was at hers. They studied together, whispered late into the night, and shared secrets that, at the time, I thought were sacred. But not to my parents. I'll never forget the first time I realized there was something off. I was maybe 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table coloring, when Emily came by to pick Caroline up for a sleepover. My mom's face changed the moment she saw her, not in a dramatic soap opera way, but subtly. Her smile stiffened, her voice dropped half an octave colder, and she busied herself with dishes she'd already cleaned. My dad, who usually greeted guests with a handshake or at least a nod, didn't even lift his eyes from the newspaper. It was clear, Emily wasn't welcome. But my sister didn't see it. Or maybe she refused to. She would throw her arms around Emily, laugh like she'd never laughed with anyone else, and when she caught my mom's disapproving look, she'd roll her eyes. That was Caroline's signature move, rolling her eyes at authority, brushing aside warnings she didn't want to hear. As years passed, the tension grew. Emily became more and more of a fixture in our lives, while my parents became more and more rigid whenever she was around. They never said why, not once, not a word of explanation, not even a hint. And that silence, the silence drove me crazy. Because here's the thing, when adults don't explain something, children invent their own stories. I used to lie awake at night staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to my ceiling and wonder, what could Emily have possibly done? Did she insult my mom once? Steal something? Was it jealousy? Or something bigger, darker? Caroline didn't care to wonder. She was defiant. If my mom told her not to invite Emily over, she'd sneak her in through the back door. If my dad said he didn't want Emily joining us for Sunday dinner, Caroline would accidentally extend the invitation. It was like she was determined to prove that her best friend was innocent, maybe even perfect. And to everyone else outside our home, she was. Emily was the girl everyone wanted to be. When prom came around, she was voted queen. When the yearbook was published, she was most likely to succeed. Teachers praised her leadership, and parents of other kids wished their daughters were more like her, but not mine. My parents' hatred, or was it fear, never wavered. By the time I was a teenager, it was a shadow hanging over every interaction. Emily was part of our lives whether my parents liked it or not, and yet they never softened. If anything, their quiet hostility deepened. And me? I became the observer. I watched the way Emily would smile at my sister, then glance at my parents with something sharper in her eyes. I noticed how her compliments sometimes carried a weight of manipulation, how her stories often shifted depending on the audience. And yet, part of me still admired her. I was young, impressionable, and desperate to understand why my parents loathed someone everyone else adored. Years later, long after high school, I would finally learn the truth. But at that time, when I was 15, watching Caroline and Emily laugh in the backyard while my parents' curtains twitched with suspicion, the secret remained buried. There's a particular kind of dread in not knowing. It's like living in a house with a locked door you're forbidden to open. You don't know what's behind it, but you can't stop thinking about it. And the more you're told not to look, the more you burn to see. That's what Emily was to me. A locked door. And though I didn't know it yet, opening that door would change everything. Not just for me, but for my sister, for my parents, and for the life we thought we knew. Because behind every smile Emily wore, behind every laugh she shared with my sister, there was something festering. something my parents had tried to shield us from, something Caroline refused to believe. And when it finally surfaced, when the truth clawed its way into the light, I would realize that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it's woven into the very fabric of the people you trust most. By the time I turned 16, the quiet tension that had always lingered between my parents and Emily began to harden into something sharper, like glass splinters beneath the surface of our lives. Caroline was older than me by 3 years, and she and Emily were in college by then. But despite the fact that Emily no longer lived down the street, she seemed more present than ever. She came home with Caroline during every holiday break. She sat at our kitchen table during Thanksgiving, carving turkey as if she belonged at the head of the family. She helped decorate our Christmas tree, hanging glass ornaments while humming carols sweetly out of tune. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect guest, even the perfect daughter. But my parents saw through it. I could tell. My mother's jaw would tighten whenever Emily spoke. My father, usually polite even with strangers, was openly curt. Once, when Emily offered to wash the dishes after Christmas dinner, my dad said flatly, "Leave them. We don't need help from you." Caroline's face would flush with anger. She always leapt to Emily's defense, accusing my parents of being unfair, judgmental, and even cruel. They never argued back, never explained. They just stared, lips pressed into silence, as though speaking the truth out loud would set something dangerous free. I didn't understand it. Not yet. But that winter, the cracks widened. It started with small things: money missing from Caroline's purse, a family heirloom bracelet that vanished after Emily stayed the night. My mom blamed Emily instantly, but Caroline refused to hear it. "Are you serious? You'd rather accuse my best friend than admit you misplaced something?" She stormed out, slamming doors, while Emily stood in the hallway, her face carefully composed, hurt, but not surprised. Then there was the night of the party. Caroline had convinced my parents to let her host a small get-together while they were out of town for the weekend. "Just a few friends," she promised. But of course, when Emily was involved, a few turned into a crowd. I remember walking downstairs at midnight and finding strangers draped across our couch, red cups scattered across the carpet, and Emily in the center of it all, holding court like a queen. She was mesmerizing, I'll admit. Everyone orbited around her, hanging onto her words, laughing when she laughed. But I also saw something else that night, something darker. Emily was whispering to one of the boys from Caroline's college, her hand lingering on his arm, her smile sly. Later, I saw that same boy slip upstairs with my sister. By morning, Caroline was radiant, convinced she'd found love. But I couldn't shake the image of Emily's smirk as she nudged them together. It wasn't kindness, it was calculation. The next week, that boy stopped answering Caroline's calls. She was devastated. Emily, of course, was there to comfort her, holding her hand, whispering that Caroline deserved better. But I couldn't forget the way Emily had engineered it, as if she'd wanted to watch my sister's heart break. I didn't tell Caroline what I saw, not yet, because things escalated. One evening in early spring, my dad pulled me aside. His voice was low, urgent, like he was telling me a state secret. "Stay away from Emily," he said. "Don't let her get close to you." I asked why. For the first time, he hesitated. His eyes darted toward the window, as if Emily might be outside listening. Finally, he said, "Because she destroys what she touches, and one day, your sister will learn that the hard way." I wanted to demand details, but the look on his face stopped me. It wasn't anger, it was fear. Real fear. From that moment, I began to watch Emily differently. I saw how she subtly undermined Caroline, planting seeds of doubt. "You're so much smarter than your parents give you credit for," she'd say, making rebellion feel like empowerment. Or, "Why do you even listen to them? They don't understand you like I do." I watched her charm my sister's professors, coax secrets out of classmates, and somehow always land on top, even when it meant others stumbled. And slowly I began to understand. Emily wasn't just a best friend. She was a puppeteer. She pulled strings, tested boundaries, and fed off the chaos she left behind. The real breaking point came the summer before Caroline's senior year. Emily had convinced Caroline to take a trip with her. Just a weekend getaway to the city. My parents refused. They said no, firmly and without explanation. But Caroline, in her usual defiant way, packed her bags anyway. I'll never forget the fight that followed. My mom stood in the doorway, blocking her. "If you walk out with her, don't bother coming back." Caroline's voice shook as she shouted, "Why do you hate her so much? What did she ever do to you?" For the first time, I thought my mom might actually break her silence. Her lips parted, her eyes glistened, but then she closed them, swallowed the words, and stepped aside. Caroline left that night with Emily. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was Caroline, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Something had happened on that trip, something she wouldn't explain over the phone. My dad drove hours to pick her up, and when she came home, she was pale, hollow-eyed, and silent. Emily didn't come back with her, and that was the last time my sister ever called Emily her best friend. But here's the strange part. Caroline never told me what happened. Not then. Not for years. She just shut down. She avoided the topic, avoided the name. It was as though Emily had been erased from our lives. My parents seemed relieved, though they never celebrated. They simply carried on, pretending Emily had never existed. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't erase the questions. What had Emily done? Why had my parents been so afraid of her from the beginning? And most importantly, why did my sister, the girl who once would have fought to the death for her best friend, suddenly cut her off completely? The silence in our house grew heavier than ever. And though Emily disappeared from our lives, her shadow remained. Because betrayals like hers don't just vanish. They linger, waiting, until the truth claws its way back into the light. And when it finally did, years later, I would realize that everything my parents feared, everything they had tried to protect us from, had been real all along. And the cost of ignoring it had been far greater than I ever imagined. Years passed, and for a while it almost felt like Emily had been nothing but a bad dream. Caroline moved on, or at least she pretended to. She graduated from college, got a job in the city, and rarely came home except for holidays. My parents were cautious with her, but gentle, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. And me? I carried the questions like stones in my pocket. I had been too young when it all happened to demand the truth, but as I got older, those questions weighed heavier. By the time I was in college myself, the silence around Emily had hardened into taboo. I had tried once, just once, to bring her up. It was Thanksgiving, Caroline home for the weekend. I casually asked, "Hey, whatever happened to Emily?" The reaction was immediate. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father's jaw tightened. And Caroline, her face drained of color, snapped, "Don't ever say that name again." The room went cold. I never asked again. But the universe has a cruel way of dragging ghosts back into the light. It happened on a rainy afternoon, 6 years after Caroline's mysterious fallout with Emily. I was walking downtown, umbrella in hand, when I saw her. Emily. She was standing across the street, her arm looped through that of a man in an expensive suit. She looked older, of course, sharper somehow, but still unmistakably beautiful. Her laugh carried even over the rain, bright and careless. I froze. My first instinct was to cross the street, to confront her, to demand answers for the years of silence and pain. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to see who was watching. Or maybe it was the unsettling familiarity of that smirk, the same one she wore the night she set up Caroline with that boy. I didn't approach her, but I couldn't let it go either. That night, I called Caroline. I told her I had seen Emily. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Caroline whispered, "She'll ruin you too. Stay away." Her voice was trembling. Then she hung up. That should have been the end of it. I should have listened. But the questions that had haunted me since childhood burned hotter than ever. Why had my sister cut Emily off so suddenly? Why did my parents hate her so much? And what was the truth they were all so desperate to keep buried? I decided I was going to find out. The opportunity came 2 weeks later. Caroline came home for Christmas, bringing a box of old college belongings she wanted to store in the attic. While helping her carry it upstairs, I noticed another box shoved far back, dusty and untouched. My curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found letters, dozens of them. Some addressed to Caroline, some to my parents, all written in Emily's neat, looping handwriting. My heart raced as I flipped through them. At first, they seemed innocent enough. Notes from a best friend about classes, boys, weekend plans. But the tone shifted over time. The later letters were sharper, darker. Emily was manipulating, guilting, even threatening Caroline. One letter read, "If you don't come with me, I'll tell your parents everything. Don't think they won't believe me." Another said, "You owe me. After everything I've done for you, after the secrets I've kept, don't you dare turn your back on me now." I felt sick. What secrets? What leverage did Emily have over my sister? I tucked the letters back quickly, terrified Caroline would catch me snooping. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The words circled in my head demanding answers, and then fate delivered one. 2 days later, our neighbor Mrs. Callahan came by to drop off cookies, the way she always did at Christmas. She was chatty, as usual, until she noticed Caroline's stiff posture when Emily's name accidentally slipped into conversation. Mrs. Callahan hesitated, then sighed. "I guess it's not my place. But you know, back when they were teenagers, Emily caused more trouble than anyone realized." My mother's head snapped up. "Don't!" Her tone was sharp, final. But Mrs. Callahan pressed on, lowering her voice. "She nearly got your daughter expelled, and if Richard—" She stopped herself, glancing nervously at my father. "Well, some things are better left in the past." Richard, that was my dad's name. My skin prickled. What could Emily possibly have done that involved my father? For the first time, I saw something flicker across his face. Not just anger, guilt. That night, lying awake, I realized the truth was bigger than I'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about a toxic friendship. Emily had done something my parents were desperate to hide, something that had nearly destroyed my sister, and maybe even torn at the foundation of our family itself. And then, the final piece dropped. A week later, I received a message request on social media. From Emily. "Long time no see," it read. "I hear you've been asking about me. Maybe it's time you knew why your parents hate me so much." My heart thundered. I stared at the screen, torn between dread and irresistible curiosity. After all these years, after all the silence, Emily was reaching out directly to me. Against my better judgment, I replied, "Tell me." Her answer came quickly. "Not here. Meet me, and I'll explain everything. But be warned, it's not the story they told you." At that moment, I knew two things. First, Emily wasn't gone. She never had been. She was still out there, watching, waiting. And second, whatever truth she was about to reveal had the power to shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. And part of me, despite the fear clawing at my chest, needed to hear it. Because the real betrayal hadn't even been uncovered yet. The night of the charity gala was supposed to be a celebration. My sister Emily had poured her entire heart into organizing it, hoping it would raise funds for scholarships in our town. The hall sparkled with chandeliers, the stage decorated with ribbons and flowers, and the air buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. But beneath the surface, tension rippled like an undercurrent no one could quite name. I arrived with my parents, who looked unusually stiff, their smiles forced. Emily was radiant in her emerald dress, but her eyes flickered with nerves. And then she walked in. Rachel. Even after all these years, she had the same magnetic presence. Tall, confident, dressed in a shimmering silver gown that caught the light, she drew eyes the moment she stepped through the doors. People whispered her name, some in admiration, others in disbelief. My stomach tightened. Why was she here? Emily froze mid-sentence on stage when she saw her. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rachel said, her voice smooth as honey, as if she belonged here. "What a beautiful evening." She smiled toward Emily, but it was the kind of smile that cut rather than warmed. Whispers surged through the crowd. I overheard fragments. "Isn't that Rachel? After what happened? How dare she show her face?" I didn't understand. What exactly had happened? Emily's composure cracked. She stepped down from the stage, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she stormed toward Rachel. "Why are you here?" she hissed, her voice low but trembling. Rachel's smile widened. "Why shouldn't I be? This is my hometown, too. I have as much right to be here as anyone." "You're not welcome," Emily shot back. The room went silent. People stared, tension coiling tighter and tighter, like a storm ready to break. That's when my father stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Rachel, leave. You've done enough damage already." I blinked. Damage? My heart raced. This wasn't just personal. They all knew something I didn't. Rachel tilted her head, unbothered. "Still protecting your precious daughters, I see. Tell me, Mr. Brooks, do they even know the truth? Or are you still hiding behind your lies?" Gasps echoed across the hall. My mother paled, clutching her chest. Emily's face drained of color. And me? I felt like the ground had been yanked from under my feet. "What truth?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. Rachel turned to me, her eyes gleaming like a predator who had cornered her prey. "Oh, you poor thing. You still don't know, do you? About the business? About the deal that ruined my family?" My father's voice thundered. "That's enough!" But Rachel wasn't done. She stepped closer, her perfume heavy in the air, her words sharp as knives. "Your father destroyed my parents. He stole everything they had. And your sister, your perfect sister Emily, knew about it. That's why I was cut out. That's why they made sure I was left with nothing." The room erupted in chaos. People shouted, tables rattled, cameras flashed. Emily grabbed Rachel's arm, her voice breaking. "Stop lying. You don't know what you're talking about." But Rachel shook her off. "Lying? You think I don't have proof?" She pulled a folder from her clutch, waving it in the air like a weapon. "Financial records. Letters. Documents your father signed. I've been holding on to these for years, waiting for the perfect moment. And tonight?" She looked around, savoring the drama. "Tonight the whole town will finally see the truth about your family." My head spun. Proof? Documents? What was she talking about? I glanced at my parents. My mother's face was streaked with tears. My father's jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. Emily looked as if her world had shattered in an instant. The host tried to step in, but the crowd surged forward demanding answers. People pulled out phones, recording every word. Rachel opened the folder, pulling out papers and waving them for all to see. "Here it is. The betrayal. The lies your golden family has hidden for decades." And then, like a spark in a room filled with gasoline, chaos ignited. Emily lunged forward, snatching the papers from Rachel's hands. They tore in half in the struggle, fluttering across the floor like wounded birds. Gasps filled the air as guests scrambled to pick them up, their curious hands clutching at fragments of a secret that could ruin everything. My father's booming voice cut through the madness. "That's enough! Everyone out!" But it was too late. The truth, or some version of it, was already spilling into the world, carried on whispers, on shaky videos recorded on phones, on the glee of people who loved to see a perfect family crumble. Rachel stood tall in the center of it all, triumphant, her silver gown shimmering like armor under the harsh lights. "I told you," she said softly, but everyone heard. "One day, your lies would come back to haunt you." And in that moment I realized, whatever secrets my parents had kept, whatever history Emily shared with Rachel, it was bigger than I ever imagined. My heart pounded in my chest. The betrayal wasn't just Rachel's. It was my family's too. And I wasn't sure if we'd ever recover. The gala hall emptied slowly, like the aftermath of a storm. Guests whispered as they left, clutching scraps of paper and fragments of gossip, their eyes wide with the thrill of scandal. The chandeliers still glowed overhead, but their light felt cold now, exposing cracks I'd never noticed in the perfect picture of my family. My sister Emily slumped in a chair near the stage, her emerald dress wrinkled, her face pale. My mother sat rigid, silent tears carving lines down her cheeks. My father paced like a caged animal, muttering curses under his breath. And Rachel? She was gone. She'd slipped out amid the chaos, leaving only her words and those torn documents behind to rot in our minds. I bent down to pick up one of the scraps of paper. It was an old letter, signed with my father's name. The ink was faded, the language formal, but one phrase stood out like a knife wound: transfer of ownership. My stomach twisted. Ownership of what? "Give me that," my father barked, snatching it from my hand before I could read further. He crumpled it into his fist, veins bulging at his temples. "Dad," I whispered, my voice shaking. "What is this? What is she talking about?" His eyes flashed with something between rage and fear. Lies, all of it. She twisted everything. Emily's voice cracked as she finally spoke. "She had documents, Dad. Why would she have those if nothing happened?" "Because she stole them," he roared. His outburst silenced us, but not the questions pounding in my chest. My mother reached for his arm, her hand trembling. "Please, not here. Not now." I looked between them, at the faces of the two people I thought I knew best, and for the first time, they looked like strangers. Later that night, back at home, the silence was unbearable. Emily and I sat at the kitchen table, staring at each other, the air thick with things unsaid. Finally, she broke. "She's not lying." Her voice was flat, almost lifeless. My heart dropped. "What do you mean?" Emily's eyes glistened, but she held my gaze. "When we were teenagers, Rachel's parents owned a piece of land outside town. It wasn't much, just a rundown farm, but it was theirs. They were struggling, and our dad offered to help. He gave them money, promised he'd protect them, but the contract gave him full control of the land. He sold it later for millions when the highway was built. Rachel's family got nothing. They lost everything." Her words hit me like a punch. "And you knew?" Emily swallowed hard. "I didn't want to, but I overheard Dad talking one night. I confronted him. He said it was business, that Rachel's family was irresponsible and would have lost it anyway. He told me to stay quiet, and I did." Her voice cracked. "I kept her secret. I kept his secret, and it cost me my best friend." I sat frozen, every piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Rachel's bitterness, my parents' hatred, Emily's shame. It all made sense now. But another question gnawed at me. Why didn't they just tell me? Why hide it all these years? "Because it was easier," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Easier to paint Rachel as the villain than admit what really happened." Anger surged through me, at my father for his greed, at my mother for her silence, at Emily for protecting lies instead of truth. And yet, beneath it all, a sick ache twisted in my chest. Rachel hadn't just been my sister's best friend. She'd been part of our family. Sunday dinners, sleepovers, birthdays. We grew up with her. And we had betrayed her, even if it wasn't by my choice. The next morning, the town paper carried the story. Local family's legacy in question. Photos from the gala splashed across the front page. Rachel holding up documents, my sister crying, my father's furious face. Social media exploded. Neighbors whispered. Our phone rang nonstop. Reporters, former friends, even strangers demanding answers. My father refused to speak. "Let them talk," he said, locking himself in his office. My mother avoided eye contact, moving through the house like a ghost. But Emily wanted to fight. "She's twisting it," Emily said, pacing the kitchen. "Yes, Dad's deal was ruthless, but Rachel's acting like we destroyed her whole life. She had choices. She could have rebuilt. She could have moved on." "Could you?" I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. "If our family lost everything because of someone else's greed? If your best friend's dad was the one who signed the papers?" Emily flinched. She didn't answer. That afternoon, I drove to Rachel's old neighborhood. The farm was gone now, replaced by a strip mall and gas station, cars streaming through like ants. But I could still picture it. The barn where we used to play hide and seek, the tire swing creaking in the wind. Rachel's childhood, erased for profit. My father's profit. For the first time, I understood the depth of her fury, and for the first time, I wasn't sure she was wrong. That evening, Emily found me sitting outside, staring at the sunset bleeding across the horizon. She sat beside me quietly for a while before speaking. "I want to fix this," she said finally. I turned to her, disbelief tightening my chest. "How? You can't undo the past." "No," she admitted, "but maybe we can start by telling the truth, by admitting what happened instead of letting Rachel define the story." Her words carried a dangerous hope. But as much as I wanted to believe, I couldn't shake the image of Rachel's triumphant smile at the gala. She wasn't just exposing the past. She wanted revenge. And I feared the truth wouldn't heal us. It might destroy us completely. That night, lying awake, I replayed Rachel's words over and over. "One day, your lies would come back to haunt you." She was right. The lies had come back. And now, they weren't just haunting us. They were threatening to tear us apart. For the first time, I realized the choice wasn't just between loyalty to my family or sympathy for Rachel. The real choice was whether to stay silent like my parents, or finally face the truth, no matter the cost. And deep down, I knew. This was only the beginning. The following week felt like a slow-motion collapse. My father refused to leave the house, avoiding the press camped outside our gate. My mother drifted between denial and panic, insisting it would all blow over. Emily stayed locked in her room, her phone lighting up with endless texts she ignored. And me? I wandered through the mansion like a stranger, unable to look at its polished walls without seeing the cracks beneath. But the world wasn't waiting for us to recover. Rachel's story spread fast. News outlets, blogs, even podcasts latched onto it. The narrative was simple, easy to digest. Wealthy man manipulates struggling family, profits while they lose everything. In that story, my father was the villain, and by extension, so were we. At first, I wanted to blame Rachel for everything. The humiliation, the headlines, the shame. But every time I thought of the farm, of that tire swing, of her parents' exhausted smiles as they waved at us kids playing together, I couldn't escape the truth. Rachel wasn't inventing pain. She was naming it. One night, unable to sleep, I went down to my father's office. The door was ajar, light spilling out. Inside, he sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of old files. His face looked worn, not angry this time, just tired. "Dad?" I whispered. He didn't look up. "You should be in bed." I stepped closer. "I need to know. Did you really take everything from them?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "They came to me desperate. Rachel's father was drowning in debt. I offered a way out. I told him the land was worthless and that I was doing him a favor. He signed. And yes, the highway deal came later. I made money. They didn't." His honesty stunned me more than denial would have. For a moment, I just stared at him, searching for regret. "Do you feel bad?" I asked finally. His jaw clenched. "It was business." "No," I pressed. "Do you feel bad?" For the first time, his eyes met mine. And there, buried under layers of pride and anger, I saw something flicker. Guilt. Maybe even shame. But he didn't speak. I left his office with my chest heavy, realizing something that hurt more than all of Rachel R.'s accusations combined. The man I de-idolized wasn't the hero I thought he was. The next day, Emily knocked on my door. Her face was puffy, her voice raw. "She's agreed to meet me," she whispered. My heart skipped. "Rachel?" She nodded. "She texted. She wants to talk. But she warned me. This isn't about forgiveness. She wants answers." Hours later, we sat in a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where gossip rarely reached. Rachel arrived last, her posture sharp, her eyes scanning us like we were opponents, not family. "You came," Emily said softly. Rachel smirked bitterly. "Curiosity. Don't read more into it." I leaned forward, desperate to cut through the ice. "Rachel, please. You've told your side. Everyone's heard it. But we need to hear from you directly. Why now? After all these years?" Her eyes narrowed. "Because I watched you all live in that mansion, throw parties, act untouchable, while my parents withered away in a rented apartment they could barely afford. Because you treated me like family until it suited you to forget. Because Emily—" She turned, her voice shaking with fury. "You knew, and you stayed silent." Emily's tears spilled instantly. "I was scared. I thought if I told the truth, I'd lose everything, my family, you, and I did anyway." Rachel's jaw tightened. "You don't get points for guilt. My parents are gone. They died believing they were failures, when all along, it was your father who stripped them of dignity." Silence pressed down on us. I felt the weight of generations, of choices made before we were old enough to understand, crushing us. "Rachel," I whispered, my throat raw. "I can't undo what my father did, but I can acknowledge it. He was wrong. We were wrong. And if there's anything we can do to make it right, I want to try." She studied me, suspicion warring with exhaustion. For the first time, her anger wavered. "You think acknowledgement is enough?" she asked. "No," I admitted, "but it's a start." Her eyes softened for a fleeting second, then hardened again. "We'll see." She stood abruptly, leaving money on the table for her untouched coffee. "Don't mistake this for peace. I came to hear you squirm, not to forgive you." And just like that, she was gone. Emily sobbed quietly beside me, her body trembling. We lost her, forever. I reached for her hand, holding it tight. Maybe. But maybe we can do something else, something that matters beyond us. That night, we gathered as a family, my parents, Emily, and me. For the first time, there were no excuses, no raised voices, no denial, just the truth laid bare. My father admitted what he had done. My mother admitted she had known and chosen silence. Emily confessed her betrayal to Rachel, and I confessed my shame at loving a family built on lies. We argued, we cried. At times, we nearly gave up. But by dawn, a fragile resolve had formed. "We can't change the past," my mother said, her voice weary but clear. "But maybe we can change what this family stands for." It wasn't redemption, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. Over the following weeks, Emily and I pushed for action. We organized a foundation in Rachel's parents' names, dedicated to supporting families at risk of losing everything to predatory deals. My father resisted at first, but eventually, perhaps driven by guilt, he signed over part of his fortune to fund it. The media seized the story again. Scandal-ridden family attempts redemption. People debated our motives. Some called it a PR stunt. Others said it was too little, too late. But for the first time, I didn't care what the world thought. This wasn't about image. It was about trying, however clumsily, to honor what had been broken. One evening, I spotted Rachel at a community event we'd sponsored. She stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, eyes watchful. When our gazes met, she didn't smile, she didn't wave, but she didn't turn away either. And somehow, that small acknowledgement felt like the closest thing to hope I'd seen yet. As I watched her walk away, I realized something. Forgiveness might never come. But even without it, we could choose to live differently. To be honest, to be accountable, to stop hiding behind wealth and lies. For the first time, I felt lighter. Not because the past was erased, but because we had stopped pretending it wasn't there. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward a future where Rachel E.'s shadow no longer haunted us, because we were finally brave enough to face it. Months passed, but the echoes of Rachel's revelations still lingered in every corner of our lives. The glossy image of our family was gone, shattered beyond repair, replaced by something rawer, less polished, but, strangely, more human. The community foundation we created had started to grow. Families began reaching out, people who had signed contracts they didn't understand, people on the verge of losing everything, people who had been told they were lucky to get pennies for land worth millions. For them, Rachel's story wasn't just gossip, it was a mirror. I attended one of the foundation's first events, a workshop for struggling farmers. I stood in the back listening as experts explained legal rights in plain language, and I thought, this is what should have been done for Rachel's parents 30 years ago. Instead of shame and silence, there should have been guidance. Instead of wealth hoarded by a few, there should have been fairness. Emily joined me, her face lighter than it had been in months. "Do you think she'll ever forgive us?" she whispered. I followed her gaze. Rachel was there, again, keeping her distance. She wore no smile, but she listened intently to the speakers, her arms no longer crossed in armor. "I don't know," I admitted, "but maybe forgiveness isn't the point. Maybe it's about making sure no one else has to live her parents' story." Emily nodded, tears brimming. "Maybe that's enough." Rachel didn't approach us that day. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was proof that, despite everything, she was willing to see, not forget, not forgive, but see, that change was possible. Back home, my father had retreated into a quieter life. He was no longer the towering figure of confidence I once idolized, but a man stripped bare, confronting the wreckage of his choices. Sometimes he'd sit on the porch for hours, staring out as if searching for the version of himself who hadn't yet made the decisions that would haunt us all. My mother, though, became surprisingly active in the foundation. Perhaps guilt drove her, or perhaps she saw in Rachel's pain a reflection of her own regrets. Either way, she poured herself into the work, and for the first time in my life, I saw her not as a figure propping up my father's pride, but as a woman determined to carve meaning from the wreckage. And Emily, she was different now. The girl who once lived in fear of losing love had grown braver. She spoke at events, admitting her silence, owning her mistakes. People respected her vulnerability. She wasn't trying to save face anymore. She was trying to be honest. As for me, I carried Rachel's words with me like a compass. "You treated me like family until it suited you to forget." I vowed never to let comfort breed blindness again. Our wealth, our privilege, it wasn't a shield, it was a responsibility. One evening, after a long day at the foundation, I found a letter in our mailbox. No name, no return address, just a folded piece of paper. Inside were 3 words: "I see you." I didn't need a signature. I knew it was Rachel. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement, a fragile bridge across a broken past. And for now, that was enough. Looking back, I realized the legacy of this story wasn't the scandal, the humiliation, or even the redemption. It was the truth, that silence feeds betrayal, that unchecked power corrodes families, and that sometimes the people we treat as outsiders are the very ones who hold up the mirror we most need to face. Rachel forced us to confront who we really were, and in doing so, she gave us the chance, however undeserved, to become something better. As I close this chapter, I leave you with this. Betrayal can break families, but truth, painful, messy truth, can be the seed of change. The overlooked, the silenced, the betrayed, they are often the ones who carry the greatest strength. And to you, watching this story unfold, if you've ever felt invisible, mocked, or dismissed, know this: your story matters. Your voice matters, and sometimes the very thing meant to destroy you becomes the fire that shapes your legacy. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Truth Unraveled. More stories of betrayal, resilience, and justice are waiting. Together, let's keep uncovering the truths that change lives.